Some people are born into families. Others are born into footnotes. I was the footnote. My name is Ronan Hale, and I've spent exactly 22 years being the wrong twin. Not the evil one. Not the rebellious one. Just the wrong one. The one my parents looked through when they meant to look at my brother. The one the pack elders skipped during blessings. The one whose report cards got left on the kitchen counter while Callan's got framed in the hallway like museum exhibits. Callan Hale. My twin. My shadow. My personal recurring nightmare wrapped in a charming smile and a jaw that could cut glass. He was everything our pack in Greenwich, Connecticut, decided an alpha should be. Tall, commanding, effortlessly magnetic. The kind of man who walked into a room and made every scent in the air rearrange itself around him. Alphas respected him. Omegas softened around him. Our mother touched his face like he was something sacred. And me? I was the Omega twin, which in our world was basically the family's politely kept secret. Not that being an Omega was shameful, at least not officially. Our pack had evolved past that particular brand of cruelty, publicly. But privately, in the Hale household, an Omega son was a liability. A soft spot in the bloodline. Something to be managed. What made it worse, what made it genuinely cosmically unfair, was that I wasn't even a weak Omega. I was a psychometric Omega. Rare. Embarrassingly rare, actually. I could touch any object and read its entire emotional history like flipping through the pages of a book nobody wanted me to open. A coffee mug, and suddenly I knew every argument ever held over it. A wedding ring, and I felt 15 years of slow resentment pressed into the metal. A photograph, and I tasted grief so old it had turned into furniture, just part of the house nobody moved anymore. My pack elders called it a gift when they found out at my secondary gender presentation. Then they quietly suggested my parents keep it private. Apparently, a psychometric Omega was either extremely valuable or extremely dangerous, depending on who was doing the evaluating. My parents chose a third option. They pretended I was neither. I learned to wear gloves. Thin leather ones, soft enough to look casual, thick enough to stop the flood of other people's memories from pouring into my palms every time I brushed a doorknob. I kept them on almost always. People thought it was a style thing. I let them think that. It was easier than explaining that without them. Shaking someone's hand felt like swallowing their entire emotional biography in one involuntary gulp. Not exactly first impression material. So, gloves on, power buried. Personality carefully calibrated to take up minimum space. That was my life in our Greenwich pack house. I finished my communications degree at Yale, came home, worked quietly for a small nonprofit, and existed in the comfortable background of Callan's life like a supporting character who'd made peace with the credits. I even had a routine. Morning run, black coffee, gloves, work, dinner. I mostly cooked, while Callan got complimented for simply sitting at the table. Rinse, repeat. It wasn't a bad life. I want to be clear about that. It just wasn't mine. The morning everything collapsed was a Tuesday, which felt cosmically rude. Catastrophes should at least have the decency to arrive on a Monday, when you're already miserable and braced for it. Tuesday, I was unprepared. Tuesday, I was still in my gray sweater, holding a mug of coffee I had not yet taken a single sip of, when my mother walked into the kitchen with a smile so tight it could have snapped a wire. "Ronan," she said, "we need to talk." Those 4 words. I'd heard them used pleasantly on television, warmly, even. In our house, they arrived with the same energy as a smoke alarm. I set my mug down carefully. Gloves on. "Callan isn't coming home," she said. I waited. He had to leave quickly. It's complicated. She smoothed her blazer like the wrinkles were the actual problem. But the wedding is in 6 days. I kept waiting. Surely there was a logical sentence coming that would connect those 2 facts in a way that had nothing to do with me. "We need you to take his place." There it was. I stared at her. "I'm sorry, you need me to take his place?" The Salvatore family cannot know Callan is gone. The alliance depends on this marriage. If Damon Salvatore finds out the original agreement fell through. Mom, I held up one gloved hand. I need you to hear yourself right now. She had the expression of a woman explaining a minor scheduling conflict, not a woman asking her second son to impersonate his twin and marry a Mafia alpha. It's temporary, just until we locate Callan and Damon Salvatore, I said slowly, because I needed the words in the air between us where they could be examined. As in the Salvatore Syndicate? As in the man 3 packs are afraid to make eye contact with? That Damon Salvatore. He's also a very successful businessman. She straightened. The Hale Pack needs this alliance, Ronan. The Salvatore family has protection, resources, and connections we cannot afford to lose. If this wedding doesn't happen, then Callan should have thought about that before he disappeared on a Tuesday. I picked my coffee back up. My hands were steady, which honestly surprised me. She looked at me with that particular expression, not cruel, just certain. The one that said she had already made this decision and was only informing me as a courtesy. You leave for Nevada Friday morning, she said. The coffee finally reached my lips. It was cold. I should have left. I should have packed a bag, driven to the airport, and started a new life somewhere nobody had ever heard the name Hale. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed. The coffee was cold. I drank it anyway. Because sometimes you just have to commit to a bad decision all the way to the bottom of the mug. My mother was still standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with that practiced patience she used when she'd already won an argument and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. She had a gift for that, for making surrender feel like your own idea. I set the mug down, pulled off my right glove, picked the mug back up. The flood hit immediately. 14 months of mornings pressed into ceramic. My mother's anxiety, sharp and citrus bitter, threaded through every handle grip. Callan's careless confidence, warm and thoughtless as summer asphalt. And underneath both of them, a faint and almost erased thread, my own exhaustion. Patient, quiet. The emotional equivalent of a post-it note everyone kept writing over. I put the glove back on. Friday, I said. Friday, she confirmed. And the relief in her voice was so immediate, it was almost offensive. Like she'd been genuinely worried I might choose myself. Funny concept. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and had a completely reasonable, totally composed internal crisis that lasted approximately 4 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and looked up Damon Salvatore. That was my first mistake. Not because what I found was terrifying, though it absolutely was, but because finding it made everything real in a way my mother's kitchen announcement had somehow failed to accomplish. There's a certain protective numbness that comes with shock. Google dissolves it immediately. Damon Salvatore, 31. Head of the Salvatore Syndicate, which operated across Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Southern California with the kind of quiet efficiency that made federal investigators write long, frustrated memos. His pack controlled 3 territories. His name appeared in exactly 0 criminal indictments, which was either a testament to his innocence or his lawyers, and I had a strong instinct about which one. The photographs were the worst part. Not because he was ugly. I genuinely wish he had been ugly. An ugly villain would have been narratively appropriate and personally easier to deal with. Instead, Damon Salvatore looked like someone had asked the universe to construct an alpha from scratch and then refused to compromise on a single feature. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that looked directly at every camera like the camera had personally offended him. The kind of broad-shouldered stillness that suggested he had never been nervous about anything in his entire life. I closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it. Okay, I said to my empty room, which had the decency not to respond. Okay, we're doing this. I packed light. 2 suitcases. I refused to arrive at a Mafia Alpha's compound looking like I'd fled a house fire, but also refused to overpack for what was technically a hostage situation with a catering budget. I folded everything with more precision than the situation deserved. It gave my hands something to do. Friday arrived the way bad things tend to, quickly and without adequate warning. The drive to the airport was silent. My father sat in the front passenger seat, looking out the window like the Connecticut highway had personally let him down. My mother drove with both hands on the wheel and the specific energy of a woman who had made peace with a decision she knew was wrong and simply needed everyone around her to stop making it weird. I sat in the back with my gloves on and my earbuds in, listening to absolutely nothing, watching Greenwich blur past the window in shades of gray and November brown. At the departure terminal, my mother hugged me. It was a good hug, actually. Genuine. Her arms tight, her exhale shaky against my shoulder. For exactly 3 seconds, I felt like her son instead of her solution. Then she pulled back, straightened my collar, and said, "Remember, you are Callan until we sort this out." And there it was. "Right," I said. "Callan. Fun, charming, effortlessly alpha-adjacent." Got it. She didn't catch the sarcasm. She never did. The flight to Las Vegas was 4 hours. I spent the first hour reading everything I could find about Salvatore's syndicate territory etiquette, which turned out to be very little, because people who wrote about the Salvatore syndicate tended to do so anonymously and nervously. I spent the second hour writing a mental list of every reasonable escape route from a Nevada compound, which was more creative than practical. I spent the third hour asleep, because apparently my body had decided that if we were walking into danger, we were doing it rested. The fourth hour was for staring out the airplane window and being completely honest with myself. I was scared. Not the dramatic movie poster kind of scared. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone you keep forgetting is there until you breathe too deep. The kind that whispers very reasonably that you are about to walk into a powerful alpha's home and lie to his face, and that you have a supernatural ability you cannot use without removing your gloves, and that literally nobody on this plane knows your real name matters. But underneath the fear, buried under the stone, there was something else. Something small and embarrassing and very inconvenient. Curiosity. Because Callan had agreed to this marriage before he vanished. My brilliant, golden alpha brother had looked at everything Damon Salvatore was and said yes. And then he ran, which meant either Callan was smarter than I'd given him credit for, or Damon Salvatore was so much more than a photograph. The pilot announced our descent into Las Vegas. I tightened my gloves, straightened my spine, and reminded myself that I was Ronan Hale, a psychometric omega with a black belt in surviving being underestimated. I could do this. Probably. The car was waiting at arrivals. Not a car, actually. A vehicle. Black, long, aggressively expensive, with tinted windows dark enough to qualify as a statement. A man in a charcoal suit stood beside it, holding a sign that said Hale in clean block letters. And he had the particular stillness of someone who had been trained to wait without fidgeting and had fully committed to that training. I walked toward him with my carry-on and my 2 suitcases and the specific energy of someone who absolutely belonged here and was not internally reciting a motivational speech to himself. "Mr. Hale," the man said. Not a question. "That's me," I said, which was technically true. Hale was my last name. I was keeping my sin specific. He took my larger suitcase without asking. I let him, because arguing with a man built like a load-bearing wall seemed like an inefficient use of my remaining courage. He opened the rear door, and I slid inside. The door closed behind me with a kind of soft, expensive click that cost more than my monthly rent. The interior smelled like cedar and cold leather. I sat very still and focused on breathing like a normal person who had not just flown across the country to impersonate his twin brother at a Mafia alpha's wedding. The drive from the airport into the Nevada desert took 40 minutes. I know because I counted. Not the seconds, just the exits we passed without stopping. Each one a small goodbye to the concept of a quick escape. The Las Vegas Strip dissolved behind us. The suburban sprawl thinned. The highway narrowed. And the sky opened up wide and burnt orange around us. The kind of Nevada sunset that looks digitally enhanced even when it isn't. I pressed 2 gloved fingers against the window glass. Nothing. Tinted. Treated. Too processed to hold memories. Good. My nerves were already doing enough without the car's emotional history joining the conversation. We turned off the main highway onto a private road marked by a gate that opened before the driver even slowed down. Which meant sensors. Which meant this entire property was watching before we arrived. Which meant I had already been seen. I fixed my expression into something calm and kept it there. The compound appeared gradually, the way powerful things tend to, giving you just enough time to register each piece before the whole picture landed. A main house that was technically a mansion but carried itself with too much restraint to be flashy about it. Clean architectural lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, desert landscaping that looked intentional rather than neglected. Lights along the pathway glowing warm against the early dark. It looked nothing like what I expected. I had expected gates with visible guards and aggressive energy and the general atmosphere of a threat. This looked like something out of an architecture magazine, serene and controlled and quietly, permanently in charge, which was somehow worse. The car stopped. The driver opened my door. I stepped out onto pale stone pavers and immediately felt the dry Nevada air replace the recycled chill of the drive, warm even at this hour, carrying the faint mineral scent of the desert. And then the front door opened. I want to say I was prepared. I want to say those 4 hours of flight time and 40 minutes of desert highway, and every Google image I had studied gave me some kind of functional immunity to actually seeing Damon Salvatore in person. They did not. He stood in the doorway with the relaxed authority of a man who had never once needed to fill space because space simply arranged itself around him. Black shirt, dark pants, no tie, sleeves pushed to the elbows, like he'd been working and hadn't bothered to correct it. His hair was dark and slightly unruly in a way that felt less accidental and more like a personality trait. And his eyes, which the photographs had somehow failed to accurately document, were a deep, unreadable gray that caught the light from inside the house and held it without giving anything back. He looked at me. Not the car, not the driver. Me. And for exactly 2 seconds, something moved across his expression, too fast to name, there and gone before I could catalog it. Then he walked down the front steps toward me, and his scent hit. I have smelled a lot of alphas. Greenwich had no shortage of them, loud and competitive and smelling aggressively of dominance the way insecure men sometimes do. Callan smelled like cedar shavings, an expensive cologne, and effortless authority. Damon Salvatore smelled like a thunderstorm that had decided not to happen. Dark ozone, cool stone after rain, something deep underneath that I had no clean reference for. Just a pull, low and instinctive, that my omega biology registered before my brain had any vote in the matter. I locked my knees and smiled. "Mr. Salvatore," I said. My voice came out steady. I was genuinely proud of it. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough that I had to keep my chin level to maintain eye contact, which I did because I was not going to be the first one to look away. His gaze moved across my face with the focused patience of someone reading something they expected to understand, but didn't quite yet. "You're late," he said. His voice was low, even. The kind of voice that didn't need volume because it had never needed to compete with anything. "The flight was on time," I said pleasantly. The sunset took longer than expected. 1 beat of silence. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like a word he decided not to say out loud. "Come inside," he said. He turned and walked back toward the house without checking whether I followed. I followed, obviously. I followed. But I made sure my expression said I was choosing to. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Not worse as in threatening. Worse as in beautiful in a way that made my whole narrative about ruthless mafia compounds feel embarrassingly underprepared. Warm lighting, high ceilings, actual art on the walls, not the decorative hotel print variety, but real pieces. Textured and intentional. A wide staircase curving upward to the left. Floors that were either very expensive stone or very convincing imitations of it. And something told me Damon Salvatore did not do convincing imitations. I walked behind him and kept my gloved hands loose at my sides and cataloged everything with the focused attention of a man who absolutely needed an exit strategy. He led me through the entryway into a wide-open living space that connected to a dining area, where a long table had been set for two. Not formally, no candelabra, no intimidating floral centerpiece. Just two place settings, clean and simple, at the near end of the table. Close enough to suggest conversation was expected. I found that more unsettling than candelabra. Sit, Damon said. Not rudely. Just economically, like he'd made peace with the fact that words existed and used only the necessary ones. I pulled out the chair across from his setting and sat down with the dignity of someone who had absolutely chosen this chair and was not just taking the one that faced the door. A member of his household staff appeared with water and disappeared again so efficiently I almost missed it. Damon sat across from me, poured himself a glass, and looked at me with those gray eyes that gave nothing away and asked for nothing back. "How was Greenwich?" he said. Not quite a question. More like a test with the answer already written somewhere he could check later. "Cold," I said. "November in Connecticut is basically the universe's way of suggesting you move." He watched me. "You seem different." My stomach did something complicated. My face did nothing. "Long flight," I said pleasantly. I retain water. Another one of those almost movements at the corner of his mouth. I was starting to catalog them, the way birdwatchers catalog rare sightings. Fleeting, possibly imaginary, worth noting. The food arrived. Actual food, not a power play disguised as a meal. Roasted chicken, herb potatoes, something green that I didn't question. Simple. Good. The kind of food that suggested someone in this house actually cooked rather than performed cooking. I picked up my fork and reminded myself that I was Callan Hale, charming and confident and completely at ease in the home of a man whose last name made federal agents tired. "The ceremony is Saturday," Damon said. "I know. There will be a formal meeting with my pack elders Friday evening. They'll want to assess the bond compatibility." I kept my face neutral. "Standard." "You're not nervous," he said. Again, not a question. Should I be? He tilted his head slightly, a small movement, the kind that said he was recalibrating something. "Most people are when they meet me. Most people probably haven't had to eat airport food and survive a middle seat for 4 hours before meeting you," I said. Puts things in perspective. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I genuinely wondered if I had miscalculated the sarcasm threshold of a Nevada Mafia alpha. Then something shifted in his expression. Not the almost smile this time. Something quieter. Like he'd expected one thing and received another, and wasn't entirely displeased about the difference. "You didn't eat on the plane," he said. I stopped. "How would you know that?" "You finished that in 4 minutes. He said, nodding at my nearly empty plate. "You were hungry." I looked at my plate. He was correct, which was annoying. "Observation is useful," he said simply, and lifted his own fork. We ate in silence for a moment. Not uncomfortable silence. The strange kind, the kind that had texture to it, that felt less like emptiness and more like two people deciding simultaneously not to rush toward anything. I watched him from my peripheral vision, the way he held himself even at a dinner table, perfectly still, like stillness was a choice he made every second and never got tired of making. The way his hands moved, deliberate, unhurried. Callan's hands were always moving, gesturing, tapping, reaching for things before he decided he wanted them. "Stop comparing," I told myself. Stop doing anything that makes you look like you've studied him. You're not what I expected, I said, before I could curate the sentence properly. Damon looked up. The compound, I corrected smoothly. It's not what I expected. It's very livable, I finished. I expected more skulls. He stared at me for a full 3 seconds. Decorative ones, I clarified helpfully. You know, for atmosphere. I'll pass, he said, dry as the Nevada air outside. Your loss, I said. Very on brand. And there, for the first time, was an actual smile. Small, controlled, the kind that looked like it surprised the person wearing it. It crossed his face and disappeared quickly, like he'd checked it back in before it could establish residence. But I saw it, and something warm moved through my chest without my permission. Quiet and inconvenient, and already too late to evict. His gray eyes settled on mine across the table. Steady, patient, like he was reading something written in a language he almost recognized. Callan, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. The word tasted like a stone in my mouth. He held my gaze one beat longer than necessary. Then he looked back at his plate, and the moment dissolved. I reminded myself very firmly that I was lying to this man, that his smile was not mine to collect. That warmth in the chest was just what hunger felt like when you finally ate after a 4-hour flight. That was all it was. Probably. The word probably followed me up the staircase, down the hallway, and into the guest room his staff had prepared with the quiet efficiency of people who anticipated needs before they were spoken. The room was clean and understated. A wide bed with gray linen. A window that looked out over the desert. Dark now. The sky absolutely crowded with stars the way it only gets when you're far enough from city light that the universe stops being modest about itself. I sat on the edge of the bed with my gloves still on and stared at the stars, and had a very mature, very composed moment of what have I done. Then I took a shower, reorganized my suitcase with unnecessary precision, and went to sleep like a man who had accepted his circumstances and was not lying awake cataloging the exact quality of a dangerous alpha smile. I slept for 6 hours. It was not restful. Friday arrived the way all days arrive when you are dreading something specific, with complete indifference to your feelings about it. The Nevada sun came through the window, sharp and golden and entirely too cheerful, and I lay there for exactly 90 seconds allowing myself to feel sorry for myself before I got up, got dressed, and went to find coffee. The kitchen was at the back of the main floor, open and well lit, connected to the dining area through a wide archway. I found it by following the smell, which was the one navigation skill my Omega biology had given me that I used without complicated feelings. Damon was already there. Of course he was. He stood at the counter with a mug, reading something on his phone with the focused stillness of a man who had never once scrolled mindlessly in his life. He was wearing a dark shirt again, sleeves already pushed up, and I made a mental note to stop noticing his forearms and immediately forgot the note existed. He looked up when I walked in. Coffee, I said, pointing at the machine with the directness of someone who had not yet reached their minimum functional caffeine level. He said nothing, reached into the cabinet above the machine, produced a mug, and set it on the counter beside him. I crossed the kitchen, filled it, and leaned against the counter approximately 3 feet from him with the specific energy of a man establishing that he was comfortable in this space and not at all rattled by proximity. We stood in silence for a moment. Morning light came through the back windows. Outside, the desert was pale gold and already warm. A hawk circled something patient and far away. The elder meeting is at 7, he said. Tonight. Yes. I nodded into my coffee. How many elders? 4. My pack's senior council. He set his phone down. They will ask questions about the bond, about compatibility, about your family's territorial agreements. I've read the alliance terms, I said, which was true. I had spent 40 minutes on the plane memorizing everything my mother had forwarded in a document she titled Simply Read This. The most direct communication she had managed in years. Damon looked at me sideways. You read the terms. I'd like to know what I'm agreeing to. Callan didn't read them, he said quietly, evenly, like a fact he was simply placing on the counter between us to see what I did with it. My coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth. I recovered in under a second. Then Callan should have, I said. Signing things you haven't read is how people end up with timeshares. The silence stretched. His gray eyes stayed on my face with that particular quality I was beginning to recognize. Impatient and precise. The kind of attention that didn't miss things because it had simply decided not to. You're different in person, he said. You said that last night. I mean it more this morning. I met his gaze over the rim of my mug. Is that a problem? He considered that with the seriousness of a man who considered everything. No, he said finally. It's just interesting. Interesting. From Damon Salvatore, delivered in that tone, the word felt less like a compliment and more like the beginning of a question he hadn't finished forming yet. I changed the subject before he could form it. The hours between morning coffee and 7 o'clock moved the way pre-disaster hours always do, simultaneously too fast and too slow. I walked the grounds in the afternoon, gloves on, hands in my pockets, unmapping exits with the focused energy of someone who definitely wasn't planning anything and simply appreciated architecture. The desert property was larger than the house suggested. A guest structure to the east. A training facility I clocked through a half-open door, mats and equipment, serious and well-used. Gardens along the south side, desert plants arranged with more intention than most people gave to actual relationships. I was standing by a low wall, looking out at the open land beyond the property line, when I felt it. The shift in air pressure, the particular weight of being watched. I didn't turn immediately. I gave it 3 full seconds, finished looking at the horizon, then turned casually. A man stood 20 feet away near the garden path. Older, mid-60s, with the upright posture of former military and the careful eyes of someone who evaluated things for a living. He was watching me with an expression I didn't like at all. Not hostile. Worse than hostile. Curious. You must be the Hail Omega, he said. Ronan, I said automatically. The silence that followed was approximately 1 second too long. Callan, I corrected, with a smile so smooth I almost believed it myself. The man smiled back. Thin. Patient. Of course, he said. I'm Elder Marcus Webb. We'll be speaking tonight. He turned and walked back toward the house. I stood very still and waited until he was gone. Then I looked down at my gloved hands. Tonight was going to be a problem. I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and gave myself exactly 5 minutes to panic, privately and thoroughly, before I pulled it together. I used all 5. Then I stood up, changed into the cleanest, most composed outfit I had packed, and had a very direct conversation with my reflection in the bathroom mirror. You have survived 22 years of being invisible in your own family, I told myself quietly. You have a supernatural ability to read the emotional history of objects. You memorized a 40-page alliance document on a plane. You can handle 4 old people and a dinner table. My reflection looked cautiously unconvinced. The gloves stay on, I added firmly. No touching anything without them. No slipping. No using your actual name. You are Callan Hale until further notice. And Callan Hale is confident and charming and does not visibly sweat under pressure. I paused. You are so much smarter than Callan, I told myself. Use it quietly. That part actually helped. The meeting was held in a formal sitting room off the main hallway that I had not explored yet. Longer than it was wide, with low bookshelves along one wall and 4 chairs arranged in a loose semicircle facing a single couch. The symbolism was not subtle. 4 of them sitting in judgment, one of me sitting in the position of being judged. I walked in with my shoulders back and my gloves on, and my expression set to pleasantly unreadable, and I sat on that couch like I had chosen it specifically for the view. Damon stood near the window, not sitting, standing slightly apart from the elders, with the contained energy of a man who had called this meeting and was now watching it the way a chess player watches a board he already understands. Elder Marcus Webb sat directly across from me, same thin patience from the garden, same careful eyes. Beside him, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back severely and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once slouched and considered it a personal philosophy. Elder Patricia Vance. To her left, two men I mentally cataloged as Elder Raymond Cross, who looked tired in the permanent way of someone carrying old grief, and Elder Cole Bennett, who was younger than the others by at least a decade and watched me with open, unguarded assessment. "Thank you for joining us," Elder Vance said, with the warmth of someone reading warmth off a prepared card. "Of course," I said. "I've been looking forward to it." That was a lie so complete, it almost looped back around to being impressive. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "We'll begin with the bond assessment. As you know, PAC law requires confirmation of scent compatibility before any formal mating ceremony. This is standard procedure." "Understood," I said. "You'll need to remove your gloves for the scent read," he said. The room temperature did not change. My internal temperature dropped approximately 40 degrees. I kept my expression exactly where it was. "I have a mild contact sensitivity," I said smoothly. "My Omega physician recommended I keep them on in new environments until my system acclimates. Scent presentation should still read clearly. Omega biology doesn't require bare skin for baseline compatibility assessment." That was technically true. Scent read from an Omega didn't require skin contact from the Omega's side. It required proximity and willingness, both of which I could offer without removing anything. Marcus held my gaze for a beat too long. Elder Vance made a small note on the paper in her lap. Elder Cole tilted his head. "Your file listed your secondary presentation as late onset, 20 years old," Marcus said. "Yes." "Unusual for a PAC bloodline as established as the Hale line. My brother presented at 16, I said. I took my time. I've always been more thoughtful than punctual. Something shifted in Elder Cole's expression. Not suspicion, something closer to amusement, quickly professionalized. Damon, from the window, said nothing, but I felt his attention shift toward me with the subtle weight of a change in air pressure. The questions continued for 40 minutes. Alliance terms, which I answered cleanly and correctly because I had actually read the document. PAC integration expectations, which I navigated with careful vagueness dressed as confidence. Territorial boundaries. Mating timeline. Heat cycle management under PAC law. That last one required me to answer questions about my own Omega biology in the third person of a person I was pretending to be. A specific kind of mental gymnastics I had not trained for, but apparently could perform under pressure. I was doing fine. I was genuinely doing fine. And then Elder Marcus said, very quietly, "Tell me about your relationship with your brother." The room went still in a way that felt less like silence and more like held breath. I looked at him directly. "Callan and I are close," I said. "The way twins are. We understand each other in ways that don't always need words." "And yet he sent you ahead," Marcus said. "Alone. 2 days before the ceremony. He had matters to finalize in Greenwich," I said. The lie came out even, clean, practiced from a script my mother had handed me that I had privately considered inadequate and now desperately needed. Marcus nodded slowly. Then he said, "You have different scent markers than the sample your family submitted in the initial bond documentation." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I did not move. I did not blink. I held Marcus's gaze with everything I had and said, "Scent markers shift with environment and stress response. Travel. New territory. Proximity to a strong alpha presence." I kept my voice level. "Basic Omega biology." Marcus looked at me for a very long moment. Then he looked at Damon. Damon looked at me. And I understood, with the cold clarity of someone whose plan had just developed its first visible crack, that the two of them had already spoken about this before I arrived. That thought sat in my chest like swallowed ice, spreading cold outward from the center, while I held my expression perfectly still and maintained eye contact with Marcus like a man who had absolutely nothing to hide and found the entire conversation mildly interesting at best. Damon pushed off from the window, not aggressively, not with any visible urgency. He simply moved the way he did everything, with that deliberate, unhurried quality that somehow covered ground faster than it should. He crossed the room and sat in the empty chair to Marcus's left, which put him directly in my sight line. Close enough that his scent reached me again, thunderstorm that decided not to happen. I held my breath for exactly 1 second, then released it slowly through my nose like a normal person experiencing normal amounts of stress. I think that's enough for tonight, Damon said. Marcus turned to look at him. Something passed between them, wordless and weighted, the kind of communication that only existed between people who had spent years learning each other's silences. The assessment isn't complete, Marcus said. It's complete enough, Damon said. Quiet. Final. The specific tone of a man who did not repeat himself because he had never needed to. Elder Vance looked between them. Elder Raymond studied his own hands. Elder Cole watched me with that open assessment that had never quite closed, and I got the distinct impression he was the most dangerous one in the room precisely because he looked the least threatening. Marcus held Damon's gaze for 3 seconds. Then he sat back. We'll resume any outstanding items after the ceremony, he said, which was technically a concession wrapped in a delay, and I was grateful for it the way drowning people are grateful for anything solid. The elders stood. I stood. Hands were not shaken, which was its own mercy. Elder Vance gave me a look on her way out that I catalogued as unfinished business. Elder Cole paused beside me for just a moment. Interesting answers, he said quietly, not unkindly. Then he followed the others out. And then it was just Damon and me and the sitting room, and the very loud silence of everything that had almost just happened. I turned to face him. He was already looking at me. Thank you, I said carefully, for ending it when you did. Marcus would have kept going until he had what he wanted, Damon said. That doesn't serve either of us right now. Either of us. I turned that phrase over, examined it, set it down. Can I ask you something? You're going to regardless, he said. Fair. What did you and Marcus discuss before I arrived? Damon was quiet for a moment. He moved to the small drinks cabinet near the bookshelf and poured 2 glasses of something amber without asking if I wanted one. He held mine out, and I crossed the room and took it, careful not to let our fingers overlap, because my gloves were on but my nerves were not. The scent documentation your family submitted was taken from Callan 6 months ago, he said. Standard pre-bonding protocol. When you arrived, Marcus noticed the variance immediately. I explained the variance, I said. You explained it well, he said, which was not the same as saying he believed it. I took a sip of the amber drink. Whiskey. Good whiskey, smooth and warm, and I needed it more than I wanted to admit. Damon. Don't, he said, not harshly, almost gently, which was worse. Not tonight. I looked at him. He was watching me with those gray eyes that gave nothing away, and for the first time since arriving in Nevada, I felt the full weight of what I was doing pressed down on me without the cushion of adrenaline to soften it. I was lying to this man. Every hour I spent in his house, eating his food, sleeping in his guest room, sitting across from his elders, and performing a borrowed identity, was another layer of something I was going to have to answer for eventually. And he was standing here, close enough that I could see the faint tiredness around his eyes that the photographs had never shown, and he was saying not tonight like he was offering me something I hadn't earned. Why are you being patient with me? I said. It came out quieter than I intended. He considered that for a long moment. Because whoever you are, he said, you read a 40-page alliance document on a plane. You defended yourself in front of 4-pack elders without flinching. And you corrected your own lie in under 2 seconds when you slipped earlier. I went very still. He had caught the name slip in the garden. Of course he had. He had caught it and filed it and said nothing, and had been saying nothing about it since. And I was standing here thinking I had been managing this situation when actually this man had been managing me with a patience so precise it felt almost like kindness. Callan wouldn't have done any of that, Damon said simply. He took a sip of his whiskey. Callan also wouldn't have made a joke about decorative skulls. The silence stretched. I should have deflected. I should have laughed it off, reassigned the observation, bought myself another 12 hours of borrowed identity. Instead, I looked at Damon Salvatore across 2 feet of expensive sitting room air and said nothing. Because there was nothing left that wouldn't cost me something. He set his glass down. Get some rest, he said quietly. The ceremony is tomorrow. He walked out. I stood there holding my whiskey and understood, with every psychometric instinct I had spent 22 years suppressing, that the crack in the glass had already happened. I just hadn't heard it yet. I finished the whiskey, standing exactly where Damon had left me, alone in the sitting room with the low lamps and the weight of everything unsaid pressing into the air around me like humidity before a storm. Then I set the glass down on the cabinet very carefully, because it was good crystal and I was not going to shatter something expensive on top of everything else I was currently managing. I went back to my room. I did not sleep. I lay on top of the gray linen with my gloves still on and stared at the ceiling and had the kind of honest internal conversation that only happens at 11 o'clock at night when there is no distraction left to hide behind. Damon knew. Not everything. Probably not my name, not my ability, not the specific shape of the lie my mother had constructed and handed me like a carry-on bag. But he knew I was not Callan. He had known since the airport, maybe before, and he had said nothing. And he had fed me dinner and defended me to his elders and handed me good whiskey and said not tonight with the patience of a man who had decided to wait for something without explaining what he was waiting for. That was the part one could not map cleanly. Callan would have panicked by now. Callan, golden and charming and constitutionally allergic to situations he could not immediately win, would have either talked his way into a corner or called our mother from the bathroom at a formal dinner. I was not panicking. I was something adjacent to panicking, technically, but it was the organized kind. The kind where you lie on a bed and dismantle the problem into components and look at each piece separately until the whole thing becomes manageable rather than catastrophic. Component 1, Damon knew the scent was wrong. Component 2, he had not exposed me. Component 3, he was marrying me anyway. Component 4, I did not understand why. And not understanding why was the most dangerous part of this entire situation, because Damon Salvatore did nothing without reason. And a reason I couldn't see was a reason that could reach me from directions I wasn't watching. I pressed my gloved palms against my eyes. Somewhere outside, the Nevada desert was doing its nighttime thing, cooling rapidly, wind moving across open land with the soft, persistent sound of something that had been moving long before any of us arrived and would continue long after. I focused on that sound and let it slow my pulse down to something functional. I must have slept eventually, because the sun woke me. Saturday. Wedding day? I lay there for 10 seconds allowing that to be completely real. Then I got up, showered, and looked at the garment bag hanging on the back of the closet door that had appeared sometime yesterday. Staff efficiency again, silent and precise as everything in this house. Inside was a suit. Deep charcoal gray, clean lines, no ornamentation. The kind of tailoring that required actual measurements rather than approximation. I touched the fabric through my gloves and felt nothing, which meant it was new, recently made, carrying no emotional residue yet. Made for Callan's measurements, almost certainly. It fit me almost perfectly, which was either a coincidence or a sign, and I was not in the headspace to decide which. I was standing at the window in the finished suit, looking at the morning desert going pale gold under early sun when the knock came. 2 knocks, quiet and even. "Come in," I said. Damon opened the door and stopped just inside the frame. He was wearing charcoal too, slightly darker than mine, with a white shirt and no tie, and he looked like someone had designed him specifically to make mornings feel significant. I hated how immediately I noticed this. I cataloged it, filed it under irrelevant, and watched it refuse to stay filed. He looked at me by the window. I looked at him in the doorway. "You didn't eat breakfast," he said. "You tracked my breakfast again," I said. "The kitchen reports to me." "That's either very efficient or slightly alarming," I said. "I haven't decided." The corner of his mouth moved. I was up to 7 confirmed sightings of that almost smile now. I had stopped pretending I wasn't counting. He crossed the room and stopped beside me at the window, not close enough to crowd, just close enough that his scent reached me again. That cool, dark ozone warmth that my omega biology had apparently decided to treat as a navigational landmark. We looked at the desert together for a moment. "You're afraid," he said. "I'm practical," I corrected. "They're similar, but the second one has better posture." "Ronan," he said. The world stopped. Just for a second. Just long enough for the sound of my actual name in his voice to travel from my ears to somewhere considerably deeper and do damage I was not prepared for. I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me, gray eyes steady and patient, and carrying something in them I hadn't seen there before. Not accusation, not triumph, something quieter than both. "That's my name," I said. My voice came out even. "Barely." "I know," he said. "How long?" "The airport," he said simply. "Your scent is nothing like your brother's. And you looked at the car like you were memorizing the exit route." I exhaled slowly. "And you didn't say anything." "No." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a hawk crossed the pale gold sky in a long, unhurried arc. "Because Callan ran," he said. "And you came anyway." The silence between us held that sentence like cupped water, careful and full. "The ceremony starts in 2 hours," he said. "I need to know if you're staying." I looked at him, at the steadiness in his face, and the question underneath it that was much larger than 2 hours or 1 ceremony, or even 1 borrowed name. "Are you still willing to marry me?" I said, knowing I'm not him. "I'm asking you to stay," he said. That should answer it. My chest did something complicated and warm and deeply inconvenient. "I have conditions," I said. He waited, patient as the desert outside. Patient as everything about him had been since the moment I stepped out of that black car with my 2 suitcases and my borrowed name and my gloved hands and my quietly catastrophic plan. I turned fully away from the window to face him. "My real name is Ronan Hale," I said. "Not Callan. Never Callan. If we do this, that is the name that goes on every document, every pack record, every formal introduction from this point forward. I am not a substitute. I am not a placeholder. I am not my brother's understudy." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation, without qualification. I held up 1 finger. "I'm not finished." Something in his expression shifted, warm and quiet, and trying very hard not to be visible about it. "Go ahead." My ability. Psychometry. I read the emotional history of objects through touch. I have been managing it privately my entire life, and I will continue to manage it on my own terms. I will not be studied, assessed, or reported to your pack elders as a strategic asset. It is mine. It stays mine. It stays yours, he said. And Callan, this was the hard one. The one that had been sitting at the back of my throat since Friday morning in a Connecticut kitchen. Whatever he's involved in, whatever made him run, I need to know he's safe. I'm not asking you to protect him. I'm asking you not to hurt him. Damon was quiet for a moment. The longest pause he had given any of my conditions. If your brother stays out of Salvatore territory business, he said carefully, then I have no interest in him. It wasn't a promise. It was something more honest than a promise, a boundary clearly drawn. I nodded. Those are my conditions. He looked at me across the morning light of that quiet room and said, "Ronan Hale." Just my name. Said plainly, the way you say something you intend to keep saying. "Yes," I said. "Are you staying?" I thought about my mother's kitchen and the cold coffee, the garment bag and the 40-page document, the hawk crossing the pale gold sky, the 7 almost smiles I had cataloged in less than 48 hours. The way he had said not tonight, like he was protecting something that hadn't been named yet. "Yes," I said. "I'm staying." The ceremony was small. That surprised me. I had built a picture in my head of something formal and performative, a display of alliance dressed as celebration, the kind of event that was really a business meeting with better catering. Instead, it was held in the garden on the south side of the property. Desert plants arranged around a simple arch of pale wood. Nevada sky enormous and blue and cloudless above us. The 4 elders were present. A small number of Damon's most trusted pack members stood in a quiet half-circle. No audience. No performance. Elder Marcus Webb stood at the front. And when I walked out and stopped beside Damon under the arch, Marcus looked at me with those careful, evaluating eyes and said, very quietly, so only I could hear, "Ronan Hale." I held his gaze. "I looked up the psychometric registry this morning," he said. "Rarest classification in the continental United States. Your family kept you very quiet." "My family kept a lot of things quiet," I said. He studied me for one more moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate, like something had been confirmed that he had suspected for longer than I knew. "Good," he said simply, and turned to begin the ceremony. I stood beside Damon under that pale wood arch and faced forward and focused on breathing in a normal rhythm while my heart conducted its own separate, chaotic symphony entirely without my permission. Damon's hand found mine. Not dramatically, not with announcement. He simply reached across the small space between us, and his fingers closed around my gloved hand, steady and warm, and he kept his eyes forward, like this was the most natural thing he had done all morning. I looked down at our hands. Then I did something I had not planned and could not entirely explain. I pulled off the glove. My left hand, bare, slipped into his, and the flood hit immediately, the way it always did. The emotional history of contact. But what I felt from Damon Salvatore's hand in that moment was not what I expected. Not dominance, not strategy, not the cold architecture of a man who had calculated every move. I felt steadiness, deep and old and quiet, like bedrock, the kind that had been tested and had not moved. Underneath it, carefully contained but present, something that felt startlingly like relief. Like he had been waiting for something to make sense for a very long time. And underneath even that, so new it barely had shape yet, something warm and cautious and entirely directed at me. My throat tightened. I kept my hand in his. The ceremony finished. Elder Marcus said the words that pack law required. Damon answered his part in that low, even voice that had somehow already become familiar. When it was my turn, I answered clearly, with my actual name. And nobody corrected it. That small thing felt enormous. Afterward, when the elders had gone inside and the pack members had drifted back toward the main house, Damon and I stood alone in the garden in the warm Nevada afternoon. The desert stretched out beyond the property wall in every direction, vast and patient and indifferent to human complexity. "You took the glove off," he said. "I know. What did you feel?" I looked at him, at the steadiness in his face, and the question underneath it, and the relief I had felt pressed into his palm like something he had carried alone for too long. "You were waiting," I said, "for something real." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached up and touched my face, just his fingertips against my jaw, careful and deliberate. "So were you," he said. He kissed me, slowly, warmly, unhurriedly, the way he did everything, like he had decided this was worth taking time over and intended to honor that decision fully. I felt it move through me, from my mouth down to somewhere considerably more structural. My free hand found the front of his shirt, The desert wind moved around us both, like it had simply decided to include us in whatever it was doing. When he pulled back, his gray eyes were closer than they had ever been. And for the first time since I had arrived in Nevada, they were fully readable. "Ronan Hale," he said quietly. "Not a substitute." "Not a substitute," I agreed. He tucked my bare hand against his chest. I felt his heartbeat under my palm, steady and real, and I let it be exactly what it was. Somewhere in Connecticut, Callan was still missing. Somewhere in Nevada, Marcus Webb was writing notes I would need to eventually address. Somewhere in the structure of this alliance, there were complications I hadn't found yet, and answers I still needed. But right here, in this garden, with this man's heartbeat under my hand and the desert going gold around us, and my actual name finally sitting in my mouth without tasting like a stone, I let myself have the moment. I had come to Nevada as someone else's replacement. I was leaving that garden as no one's replacement at all, just Ronan Hale. Finally, completely, and for the very first time, his. And that, I decided, holding his steady gray gaze in the warm Nevada afternoon, was exactly enough to begin with. The house was quiet when we finally went inside. Not the tense quiet of the previous nights, the one that had felt like held breath before a storm. This was something else. Settled. The kind of quiet that comes after a long rain, when the air is clean and everything that needed to happen has already happened. Damon walked beside me through the hallway, close enough that our shoulders brushed. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us seemed to need to. The elders had retired to their quarters. The pack members had scattered to whatever corners of the compound they occupied. Somewhere in the kitchen, a staff member moved quietly, the soft clink of dishes, the distant sound of running water. Domestic sounds. Ordinary sounds. They felt almost surreal after everything. Damon stopped outside the door to what I assumed was his room. My room now. Our room. Technically, though the word felt too large for my mouth at the moment. "Unless you'd prefer the guest room tonight," he said. Not pushing, just offering. The way he had offered whiskey, dinner, patience, always leaving space for me to choose. I thought about the guest room. The gray linen, the window looking out at the stars, the bed I had slept in alone for 2 nights while lying awake cataloging almost smiles. I thought about lying there again tonight, knowing what I knew now, knowing that his hand felt like bedrock, knowing that he had said my name like he intended to keep saying it. "No," I said. "I don't want the guest room." He nodded once, opened the door, and stepped aside to let me enter first. The room was larger than the guest room, but not ostentatiously so. A wide bed with dark sheets. A window facing east, toward the rising sun, I realized, not the desert sunset. A bookshelf filled with worn paperbacks, the spines cracked from reading. A single photograph on the nightstand. A much younger Damon with an older woman who had his same gray eyes. His mother, I guessed. I didn't ask. I pulled off my second glove, the right one, and set it on the dresser. My hands felt strange. Naked. I had worn gloves for so many years that bare skin against air felt like a confession. Damon watched me from the doorway. Then he crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked up at me with those steady eyes. "Come here," he said quietly. I went. He didn't pull me down. He didn't reach for me. He just waited, patient as the desert, patient as everything about him had been, until I sat beside him on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under our combined weight. His scent wrapped around me, warm and dark, and I let it. "I meant what I said," he told me. "In the garden. You're not a substitute. You were never going to be one. Not for me." I turned to look at him. His face was close enough that I could see the individual strands of dark hair falling across his forehead, the faint scar on his jaw that the photographs had airbrushed out, the way his gray eyes caught the low lamplight and held it. "Then why did you agree to marry Callan in the first place?" I asked. "If you knew, if you could tell he was wrong." Damon finished. He wasn't wrong. He was just incomplete. The Alliance needed a Hail Omega. Your family offered one. I didn't know until the sent documentation arrived that they had two. I processed that. You would have married him. I would have made it work, Damon said. That's what I do. I make things work. But I wouldn't have, he stopped. For the first time since I had met him, he seemed to be searching for words. I wouldn't have felt this. I held very still. Felt what? He reached out and took my bare hand in his. The contact was deliberate, careful, not a test, not a claim. Just a connection. Steady, he said. For the first time in years, I feel steady. My throat tightened. I looked down at our hands, his larger, mine smaller, both of them bare for the first time between us. No gloves, no barriers, no borrowed identities. You felt it too, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. In the garden. When I touched you, I felt. I exhaled slowly. Relief. Like you'd been carrying something alone for a very long time and finally didn't have to. Something shifted in his expression. That almost smile I had been cataloging, but softer now. Less guarded. You read me, he said. That's what I do. Not everyone would have stayed after reading that. I'm not everyone, I said. He kissed me again. Slower this time. Deeper. The kind of kiss that wasn't asking permission anymore, because permission had already been given, repeatedly, in a dozen different ways. His hand came up to the back of my neck, fingers threading through my hair, and I made a sound I hadn't planned on making. Low. Needy. Embarrassingly honest. Damon pulled back just far enough to look at me. His pupils were blown wide, his scent richer now, that dark ozone thickening into something almost sweet. Ronan, he said, and my name in his voice was absolutely everything. Yes, I said, because I didn't know what else to say, because yes seemed to cover all of it. Yes to this room. Yes to this man. Yes to the way his hand felt on my bare skin, and the way his heartbeat had steadied mine, and the way I was finally not pretending to be someone else. He laid me back on the bed, slow and careful, like I was something precious. The lamplight caught the edges of his face. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched into darkness, and somewhere far away, the hawk I had watched that morning was asleep in its nest. But here, in this room, there was only us. Only steady hands and steady breath and the quiet, certain knowledge that I had not ended up here by accident. Not by my mother's manipulation, not by my brother's disappearance, not by any of the forces that had pushed me across the country with 2 suitcases and a borrowed name. I had ended up here because I had chosen to stay. And Damon Salvatore, this impossible, patient, thunderstorm of a man, had chosen to let me. I closed my eyes and let the desert night settle around us like a second skin. This was not the ending I had imagined for myself, but it was, I realized, exactly the beginning I needed.